A judge laughed at a girl claiming her mother was a seal, until the courtroom doors opened. The courtroom was heavy with the kind of air that crushed silence into something sharp. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of bodies leaning forward, eager for scandal, eager for laughter. The girl, no more than 12, stood near the railing where truth was meant to be spoken, yet all she carried was ridicule pressing down on her small shoulders. Her voice had been steady when she said it, steady but quivering at the edges with the fear of not being believed. She had said her mother was a Navy SEAL. The words had barely left her lips when the smirks began, first from the audience, then from the attorney across the aisle. The kind of smirks adults give when a child tells a story too big to be theirs. But what shook her most was the chuckle from the judge himself. A sound that wasn't just disbelief but mockery, laced with the assurance of his own superiority. He leaned forward on his bench, his black robe falling heavy around him, his gavel resting like an ornament he rarely needed because his voice carried its own force. He repeated her words slowly, dragging them across the room so everyone could taste the absurdity. "Your mother, a Navy SEAL," he said, the words like a question meant to unravel her, not confirm her truth. The courtroom erupted into restrained laughter, lawyers hiding their smiles behind hands, clerks shaking their heads as though a child's imagination had no place in the house of law. The girl clenched her fists, her nails pressing into her palms until tiny crescents marked her skin, but she did not take her words back. She remembered her mother's voice from years before, a voice that told her never to shrink before disbelief. Truth, her mother had said, doesn't need to scream. It only needs to stand. And so the girl stood, even as the sound of laughter poured over her like cold rain. The judge shook his head, pity edging into the mockery now. "Child, I understand you want to protect your mother, but Navy SEALs are men. They are warriors trained beyond what most human beings can endure. This," he gestured vaguely toward her, "is a story, not a statement." The girl swallowed hard, her throat burning with the weight of silence pressing back against her. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, the great oak doors at the back of the courtroom groaned. Every head turned. The sound was slow, deliberate, like the world itself pausing to listen. The doors pushed open, light slicing through the dim chamber, and in walked a figure that erased every trace of laughter from the air. Her mother. She wore no uniform, no medals pinned to her chest, but she carried something heavier than fabric and metal. She carried presence, her shoulders squared, her stride even, eyes steady with the kind of calm only those who have faced storms and lived could hold. And she was not alone. Behind her came 6 figures, each one walking with precision, their silence louder than thunder. They were her unit. The courtroom shifted, breath caught in throats. The laughter, once eager, now curdled into stunned quiet. The girl's eyes flooded, not with tears of fear but with vindication. The judge's lips parted, but no words found him. For the first time in his long career of holding authority, he was not the most commanding presence in the room. Her mother stopped at the front, her boots planted with a certainty that rippled through the floorboards. The girl ran to her, but before touching her, she paused, as though even in her desperation she recognized the solemnity of this moment. Her mother bent low, whispered something only her daughter heard, and then straightened, her gaze locking onto the judge with the weight of an ocean storm. "You mock a child for speaking truth," she said, her voice even, calm, but edged with steel. "You mock her because you cannot imagine what she has seen." The judge fumbled, reaching for his gavel though no one had spoken out of turn. His hand trembled, the wooden handle slipping in his palm. The silence of the SEAL unit behind her was a wall no one dared to scale. They stood like shadows cast from iron, their eyes forward, unreadable, carrying with them the unseen weight of wars fought in places no one in this courtroom could pronounce. The mother stepped forward, her presence filling the space that once belonged to the judge. "You sit in your robe and claim to know truth. Yet truth stood here before you in the form of my daughter, and you laughed. Her words were not shouted. They did not need to be. The quiet authority with which she spoke was more cutting than any raised voice. The audience shifted uncomfortably, people lowering their eyes as though caught in the act of betrayal. Even the attorney, once smirking, now looked down at his notes, the paper blurred by the shame that flushed his face. The girl clung to her mother's hand, her small fingers wrapping around strength she knew too well. Memories rushed through her. The nights her mother had returned late, uniform torn, body bruised, but eyes still burning with fire. The mornings when training never stopped, when discipline was not a duty but a rhythm of living. And yet, despite it all, her mother had been soft with her, gentle in ways that contradicted the hardness the world demanded of her. The judge cleared his throat, his voice breaking. "Ma'am, I did not mean. You meant," her mother cut in, her voice unflinching. "You meant to diminish her. To teach her that truth spoken from small lips is fragile and disposable. But let me tell you, Judge, her truth is forged in the same fire that tempered me." Gasps spread like wildfire. The girl's chest swelled, not with arrogance but with the quiet power of being seen. Her truth, once mocked, now stood armored by the presence of those who had lived it beside her mother. One of the SEALs stepped forward, his voice rough, gravel ground into sound. "We served with her, we bled with her, and she carried more weight than men twice her size. If you doubt her, you doubt us all." The judge's face blanched, his authority shrinking beneath the crushing weight of eyes that had stared into death and returned. He set his gavel down, no longer able to grasp it with steady hands. The courtroom, once buzzing with arrogance, now bent beneath the silence of truth revealed. The girl pressed her cheek against her mother's side, her tears warm but fierce. She was not crying from pain but from the sharp relief of justice arriving in the form of the only woman who had ever made her feel safe. Around them, people shifted uneasily, their laughter from earlier hanging in the air like a stench they could no longer bear. Her mother leaned down again, whispering, "Never let them strip truth from you, not even when they laugh." The girl nodded, her small hand gripping tighter. The memory of this moment would never leave her, for it was carved deep into her bones. The day she was mocked for believing, the day the world learned what belief really looked like. The courtroom sat frozen, waiting for the judge to reclaim control, but he could not. Not when the presence of warriors filled the room. Not when the truth he had mocked stood living, breathing, undeniable before him. And in that silence, the girl realized something profound. That sometimes the strongest justice doesn't come from gavels or robes, but from the unshakable weight of truth walking through the door. The silence in the courtroom was fragile, as though one misplaced breath might shatter it into chaos. The judge sat stiff, his robe pooling around him like shadows that no longer carried power. His hands, once steady symbols of order, trembled on the bench. The girl clung to her mother's hand, the warmth of it grounding her in a place that only moments ago had felt hostile and cruel. The mother's eyes stayed on the judge, unblinking, piercing through every veil of arrogance he once wore. "You laughed at her because you thought the truth belonged only to men who looked like warriors," she said, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. "But I stand here because I lived the life you said could not exist." Whispers moved through the crowd, murmurs of disbelief tangled with awe. Yet none dared raise their voices fully, not when the unit still stood like statues forged from iron, their presence pressing against every heartbeat in the room. The girl could feel her mother's strength vibrating through her grip, but more than that, she felt the stories her mother never told, pulsing beneath her skin. Stories of nights where silence meant survival, of oceans darker than death, of moments where a single choice meant life for the team or annihilation. Her mother had carried all of that, and still came home to tuck her in, to read to her, to tell her she mattered more than medals, more than battles, more than the world. The judge cleared his throat, but his words stuttered as though he had to drag them through stone. I did not know," he whispered, the confession cutting through the thick air. Her mother tilted her head, her eyes sharp. You did not need to know. You needed only to believe that a child's words could be truth. The girl felt her chest tighten at the sound of those words, as though something inside her had been lit, a flame that could never be extinguished. She looked at the faces of the men standing behind her mother, men who had the weight of silence carved into their expressions, yet who carried respect in the way they looked at her mother, a respect deeper than any title or rank could give. One of them stepped forward again, his boots striking the floor with a sound that cut through the hush. He was tall, shoulders broad, eyes carrying the haunted look of battles that never left a man. Yet his voice, when he spoke, was steady with reverence. Judge, we followed her into fire. We followed her when fear would have broken others. We followed her because she never asked us to do what she would not. If you cannot honor her, then at least honor the truth her daughter carries. The words hung like steel in the air. The judge shifted in his chair, his authority shrinking further, his pride unraveling under the weight of men who had seen the face of war and returned not as braggarts, but as guardians of a truth he had dismissed. The girl remembered nights sitting at the kitchen table, tracing the scars on her mother's hands with her small fingers, asking questions her mother never fully answered. She remembered the way her mother would grow quiet, her eyes slipping into a distance where memories burned, but then she would smile and say, "All you need to know is that I came back for you." Now, watching her mother stand in this place where truth had been mocked, she realized those scars were not just marks of pain. They were signatures of resilience, of sacrifice, of a strength that could not be doubted by laughter or disbelief. The mother finally broke her gaze from the judge and turned toward her daughter. She knelt, their eyes level, her hand lifting to wipe away the streaks of tears on the girl's face. "You stood tall," she whispered. "You did not bend, even when they laughed. That is all I will ever ask of you. That you hold your truth like a shield." The girl nodded, her throat too tight for words. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against her mother's, the world around them dissolving into nothing but the certainty of this bond. But the courtroom was not finished with them. The prosecutor, who had smirked earlier, finally found his voice, though it cracked when he spoke. If you truly were a seal," he stammered, his tone wavering between doubt and fear, "then why hide it all this time?" The mother stood slowly, her full height commanding the space again. She turned her eyes toward him, and the quiet of her gaze was more withering than fury. "Because my service was never for applause. It was never for recognition. It was for the men and women beside me, and for the child who needed me more than the world ever could. I did not hide. I chose silence, until today, when silence became a weapon in the hands of those who mock truth." The prosecutor swallowed hard, his confidence dissolving under the weight of her words. The judge finally lowered his eyes, the black of his robe no longer carrying dignity but shame. His voice was almost broken when he spoke again. "I see now. I see the truth that I denied." The girl stepped forward, surprising even herself. Her voice was small, but steady, stronger than it had been when she first spoke. "You didn't just deny me. You denied her, and you denied every person who believes something that seems too big to you." The room stilled. The girl's words, though soft, carried a weight even the grown men could not ignore. Her mother's hand rested gently on her shoulder, pride radiating in the touch. The SEAL unit behind them remained silent, their discipline unshaken, yet their eyes held something softer now, a flicker of respect not just for the woman they had followed into battle, but for the girl who now carried the same fire. The mother turned back toward the judge one final time. "You wanted truth. You laughed at it. Now it stands before you. Do not forget this day." The judge nodded slowly, his shoulders heavy as though burdened by the gravity of what he had done. No gavel struck, no final words of authority closed the moment. Instead, it ended in silence, the silence of revelation, of shame, of respect forced into being. The girl and her mother turned toward the doors, the unit following in silent formation. Each step they took echoed louder than any verdict. The crowd parted like water, no one daring to block their path, no one daring to speak. The girl glanced back once, her eyes sweeping over faces that only minutes before had been full of mockery. Now those same faces burned with the flush of guilt, unable to meet her gaze. She turned forward again, her grip tightening around her mother's hand, a certainty blooming in her chest. When the heavy doors closed behind them, the sound reverberated through the courthouse, a final note that no one inside would ever forget. Outside, the air was sharp, the sky vast and open. The girl looked up at her mother, her voice trembling not with fear now, but with awe. "You really brought them. You really showed them." Her mother's lips curved, not quite a smile, but something deeper. "I didn't bring them for the judge. I brought them for you, so you would never again doubt that truth has power, even when the world laughs at it." The girl's heart swelled, her eyes glistening as she whispered, "I'll never forget." Her mother bent and kissed the top of her head, her lips lingering as though sealing a promise. "Then my service is not finished. It lives on in you." They walked forward, the unit forming a silent wall behind them, protectors still, not just of a woman who had earned their loyalty, but of the child who carried her legacy. The world beyond the courthouse stretched wide, uncertain, often cruel. But the girl knew now that cruelty could never stand forever against the weight of truth. She held her mother's hand tighter, her small steps falling into rhythm with the unshakable stride beside her. And for the first time, she felt not just like a child clinging to safety, but like a bearer of something unbreakable, something that would walk with her for the rest of her life. The sound of their footsteps faded into the world, but the silence they left behind inside the courthouse would echo forever. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now. Watch another unforgettable tale where destiny and courage collide in the way you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.